Today we're going to be talking about The Woman in the Yard. I am sorry this video is so late. I intended to post it last week and I just didn't. So we're filming it today. I hope you still care about my opinion, but I knew as soon as I watched this movie, if it had gone that long, I would have thought, okay, maybe I can just skip it and talk about it in like a collection of reviews in a future video because I'm doing that later this year. Not in this case. There is so much to unpack with The Woman in the Yard, and I never thought I would say that about a Blumhouse movie. My first thought when I saw the teaser for The Woman in the Yard, I was like, that looks really cool. I'm actually excited. And then I saw it was Blumhouse, so I was like, oh. And then I saw it's directed by Wam Collet-Serra, which I really hope I'm not butchering his name. And I really like The Shallows and House of Wax and Orphan. I think those are solid movies. So then I got a little bit more optimistic because we can group Blumhouse movies all together as much as we want, but at the end of the day, they're directed by different people. They're written by different people. Jason Blum is merely a producer on the films most of the time. And yes, he takes on some projects that are questionable. Let's talk about Woman in the Yard and if that was one of those movies. A mysterious woman appears in a family's front yard, delivering chilling warnings and unsettling messages, leaving them to question her identity, motives, and the potential dangers she might pose. Now, I'm not gonna lie, despite my back and forth before the movie even came out, I did go into this movie fully expecting to hate it. Yes, I did. I have to be honest about that and like where my expectations were going, and I like to tell you that because that will give you perspective on how I viewed the movie. It seemed like a lower budget Blumhouse movie similar to those in recent past, specifically last year. Okay, we got a couple Night Swim, Imaginary, some lower budget Blumhouse movies, and some of you may or may not be surprised by the fact that I did not hate The Woman in the Yard. I didn't end up hating it, and that could be because my expectations were so low that I was just expecting the worst, but I didn't hate it. And I cringe when I say that and I get nervous because I definitely have an audience of people who like to point out that I'm a contrarian for contrarian's sake. And I really don't think that I've ever not been honest about a movie. Whether or not I am trying to be a contrarian or not, I don't think I've ever done that. Not intentionally, obviously. There are so many mainstream movies that I love. Hello. And so many movies that I hate that a lot of people hate, and vice versa. A lot, you know, it's just, I just share my opinions, okay? That's all I can do because it was not well received. It did get a lot of negative reviews, which was not surprising to me when I saw that. But I don't think a lot of the negative reviews are because of the quality of the movie, rather the controversy around the ending of this movie, which we will definitely discuss in spoilers because man, oh man, I feel like it could go either way for people, and I'll obviously share where I'm at with that. I was completely surprised by this movie, and I was actually blindsided by this movie because I was expecting like a Night Swim Imaginary situation. So imagine me sobbing in the theater because that's not what I was getting. I could not believe a Blumhouse movie would take this story that far. I was blindsided. I was like, that doesn't seem like a Blumhouse movie at the end of the day. There were many aspects that do feel like that. The quality of the film, which I'll get into what I like and dislike and critiques and all of that because it's not a perfect movie, definitely. But the most common thing that I have seen in the discussion around this movie, and the most common comment is this is a lesser good a worse version of The Babadook because it is a quite literal representation of grief. And Woman in the Yard is definitely not an original idea, and I agree that it's like a very similar kind of story to The Babadook, but I don't think it's as effective as The Babadook, although I do think Woman in the Yard is kind of scarier than The Babadook. The Babadook didn't really scare me that much. But maybe if you were one of the people who think that the kid is unbearably annoying in The Babadook, then maybe The Woman in the Yard is the grief story for you. At the end of the day, all I know is that this movie needed a trigger warning. It needed a trigger warning, and again, I will discuss that in spoilers, but do look it up if you know anything about the themes around this movie, which I will briefly mention as well. They're not spoilers or anything. It's just, it is what it is with grief, right? Mental health issues. So let's get into what I liked and disliked about the movie, starting with what I liked about The Woman in the Yard. I like the simplicity of this movie. I think they played it really smart with the single location, the very simple storyline. It is pretty straightforward for most of the film. I think the three-member family, the character dynamics, the family history, although it's not the most original story in the world, I appreciated that they kept it really small and they kept it simple. For most of the movie, it gets weird and like a fever dream, okay? It does get very strange and it becomes really artistic all of a sudden. I actually loved all of the scary parts in this movie. I thought it was genuinely scary, and I loved that a lot of it was in the daytime. I think more and more horror movies are starting to do that, to be a little bit different, and soon that'll be more common, but I've been noticing a lot of movies doing that lately, where they have a lot of scary moments in daylight because they do some really cool things and there's some really cool imagery used with shadows in The Woman in the Yard, and I loved that. I thought it was great. It was scary. It was effective, especially for a PG-13 movie. But keep in mind, supernatural horror is my jam. That is my favorite type of horror. So naturally, I'm gonna be a sucker for that kind of thing every day, every time. Not every day. I'd say the performances were pretty strong as well. Like, I don't really have any negatives with that. I really liked the performance from Danielle Deadwyler. I thought she did great at portraying these emotions. Another thing that I really liked about this movie is that the attempt to tackle some very strong themes of grief, mental health, a mother losing herself to a new life that she is trying to adjust to. And I really liked that there was more depth to it than just grief. There was so much more happening. There were some drama elements in it that I really appreciated. I've seen some people call this a little bit of a slower burn, and I would say it doesn't really get scary until maybe halfway through, but there is still that tension in the beginning when the woman in all black shows up in their yard. Like, to me, that's just a horrifying image. And again, there's a simplicity about that in the beginning of the film that makes it so tense without having to put in that much effort. And some might argue that these themes weren't dealt with well. I can definitely see there's an argument for that. And again, we'll explore that a little bit more in the spoilers. But everything that I thought I would hate about this movie, I ended up liking. I thought the performances were good. It looked good visually. The story was pretty simple. And again, not the most original in the whole world, and that's fine. Do we need another grief story? Probably not. In fact, that leads me to my first thing I disliked, was the fact it was a grief story. And I know it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but I am just personally getting a little bit tired of all of the grief stories that we've been watching. I wanted grief stories and like to read about grief and stuff at the very beginning of my grief journey when it first happened. Now I'm months in and I'm emotionally exhausted. I have cried more times in the theater this year than I ever have. Becoming a mother and losing someone, multiple people in a short period of time, has made me more emotional than I've ever been. Like, I unfortunately relate to almost every story being told in a movie theater, in every movie. So on one hand, there's the benefit that I can like really appreciate it as an art form and it gets me emotionally. I've always been sensitive anyway. But now it's like I'm getting tired. I am so tired of going to the theater and ending up crying and like having to process some heavy stuff. Like, so I kind of appreciate that there's also a lot of horror comedies coming out, even though those aren't my favorite kind of movies. I don't think I'll cry. I don't think I'll go and watch them at the theater and cry at the end of the day. So now, one of the things I disliked about this, there was a reveal in this that I feel like wasn't necessary, and there was a mystery there, and it was so much more effective when it was more of a mystery. And so things are kind of spoon-fed a little bit and it over-explained at times. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. That's where the Blumhouse kind of comes in, because at the end of the day, you can tell this is a Blumhouse movie, okay? So I'm not saying it's a fantastic movie. I was pleasantly surprised by a lot of the details and the horror elements and the story going there to a really dark place. But other than that, it does come across like a Blumhouse movie, which, you know, would be fine for a lot of people. And speaking of which, there is something that feels off about this. I don't know if it's the script or if it feels like messy or even out of order. There was a scene that happened, I think, way too early in the movie that was jarring. If you know, you know. That should have happened later, I think, to show the progression of how this woman is affecting this family, and it was a little bit too early for me. So that's basically all my likes and dislikes about the movie. I think it's worth watching when it comes out on streaming, at least. I don't even know if it'll stay in theaters for that long, because they stay for like 2 weeks and then, you know, go to video on demand. But I say give it a chance, especially, well, obviously don't watch the rest of this video if you haven't seen it yet, because we are going to go in depth about that ending. But if you're curious at all, watch it, but look up a trigger warning. This deals with mental health. So if you struggle with that yourself, please look up trigger warnings for this movie. Because again, I was blindsided. I did not know that that's what it was about or where it was going. Okay, so all of that being said, I know what you're probably here for, why you clicked on this video. We're going to talk about that ending and my thoughts on that and the controversy around it. So major spoilers for the end of this movie. So this movie becomes very controversial right at the end. It's literally the last scene that makes it. But so we see Ramona in the end battling this entity. We're in the attic. She was in the beginning of the movie praying for strength. And the entity convinces her that she was praying for the strength to end her own life. So there is a lot of suicidal ideation in this movie, and we realize that is the level of her mental health struggles. And there is a scene where we see her, it was so bleak and so hard to watch. We see her struggling with this, and we see her nearly commit suicide. This is the scene that was unbearable for me. It went on for so long. I was looking away. I wish I was not in the movie theater at this point in time, especially now knowing the end. I don't think I could watch that scene again. And like I said, I was blindsided by the fact that Blumhouse would do this to me. Like, I did not expect for a Blumhouse movie of this nature to push it that far. And I can definitely see why people take issue about where this movie goes. But that's not even where the controversy lies, okay? So next we see Ramona exit the house. She wants to say goodbye to her children. I was crying. She wants to say goodbye to her children. She exits the house, and we assume that she has beaten this entity up in the attic, that she fought against it, decided not to end her own life, and she's with her children. The dog comes running up, which that's a red flag because it pretty much died earlier in the movie, right? It's safe to assume the dog died. But then we think, oh, maybe the dog didn't actually die. Now can live happily ever after on this farm. She's dealt with the grief. She's faced it head on. Now she can take on life and find herself again. Until we go back into the house. They walk up into the house. We see on her painting, it zooms in, her backwards signature on the painting. This is such a small detail in the end, but it completely changes everything. Everything, because that is the confirmation she pulled that trigger up in the attic. Earlier in the film, we see the entity show her this alternate reality through a mirror, and it mirrored that reality. So everything was backwards in that. So it's safe to assume that because her signature was backwards on this painting, she has now entered an alternate reality, heaven, or, you know, some kind of afterlife where she can be happy with herself and her children and her dog. So the reason why this is so controversial, because what is the message? What is the message there? That sometimes it's okay to end your life? That sometimes it can be a good idea? That sometimes it's valid? Absolutely not. Like, I feel like that is such a problematic message to put in a horror movie. And I feel like that can be so triggering to people who already struggle with suicidal ideation. Now, for me personally, it didn't affect me in that way. My jaw was on the floor when it showed that last shot of her signature backwards. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And that just made my whole day it's just so bleak of an ending. It's so tragic. It's so sad. And it just feels like it's not okay to do that in the story. But they did. They made their stance with it, and although it's a problematic message, they decided to make it so. And maybe because it wasn't so literal, or it wasn't, they tried to keep it a little bit vague, like maybe she pulled the trigger, but to me it was very obvious what they were trying to say in the end of that movie. So I feel like the ending completely changes and transforms the entirety of the movie. And it kind of, this sounds weird, but it left me impressed that they would even do that. Like they would even push it to that level of bleakness, because personally I enjoy an unhappy ending. This time it was hard. It was so hard because you're rooting for her so much, and just, you know, as a mom myself, it like really got to me when she was struggling and like wanted to see her children again. Like, so it almost feels like it shouldn't be allowed that they were, you know, able to do that, because it was so, it felt wrong to make her do that in the end. And I'm kind of all over the place with my thoughts, and I totally get that this review might feel messy because I don't really know. I think it is a problematic story to tell, because in the end it's like, it's okay to sometimes pull the trigger. Like, I don't believe in that. I don't support that. But at the same time, it was a good story, and the way they portrayed it, it was just like, oh my God. And it affected me so much. And so I have respect for it, for pushing it to an extreme level like that. But I don't really know. I don't know how to really feel myself. I've seen people feel strongly against the moral of the story and the message of the story and things. But at the same time, you're allowed to do unhappy endings, and that's what this movie is. If they didn't show that last shot of her backwards signature, it would have felt like another Blumhouse movie in a derogatory way. And I think the fact that they changed everything with just that one thing, it shows an effort, you know? So that's basically all my thoughts on that. I could ramble on and on about this movie and the ending of it because it was just so nuts to me. So I would love to know your thoughts though, and like how you interpret this and the ending and what you think the ultimate message is here on in this. Is it trying to tell you not to do it? I don't know. I don't know, man. I don't know what they're trying to say with this movie. But I would love to hear your thoughts and theories and everything in a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.